Reading with your kids.
Hola, niha, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful and historic neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so wicked happy that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your podcasts. We want to invite all the authors and aspiring authors who are listening to the podcast to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Please be sure to click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to discover how we can help you celebrate your book with the entire world. Now, you know, if you are an author, especially an independent or self-published author, you probably had no idea that when you were writing your book and getting it published, you had no idea that once that book was published, that you became the CEO of a small business, your book business. Yeah, it is. It's a business now. And you had no idea that there are literally thousands of books published every single... You thought I was going to say year. No. There are thousands of books published every single month. It is so hard for a book to stand out in that crowd, especially an independent or self-published book. But we would love to help you do that. If you visit readingwithyourkids.com and click on that Authors Click Here button, you will discover how you can be a guest here on the podcast. Being a guest gives you the chance to tell the world all about your book. It's fun, it's easy, and it doesn't cost you a thing. You can also learn about our Certified Great Read program. This is a program that has helped so many authors. You can also discover our monthly promotion program. We're really excited. We've helped so many authors to date, and we would love to help you. Please go to readingwithyourkids.com, click on that Authors Click Here button at the top of the page, and discover how we can help you celebrate your book with the world. Joining us once again from the beautiful state of Florida, our guest is returning to the podcast to celebrate book number 5 in his Harwood Mysteries series. It's called Murder at Pinewood Manor. Please welcome back Anthony Kolenc. Hey, Tony, how are you?
I am doing great. Just so happy to be back on your show there, Jed.
Super to have you back. The Harwood Mysteries, this is, remind us what age group these mysteries are targeted at.
So this is ages 10 and up, definitely middle school, all the way through high school, frankly. And honestly, I've had college and adults reading it and enjoying it also. But, you know, we all love to read young adult literature.
I agree, and that the middle grade novels, I think, are super fun. If somebody had to ask me what the difference between a YA title and a middle grade novel would be, I'd say, well, there's not a lot of bad language, and no one's rolling around in the sheets. It's just a story.
Well, in my scenario, because I'm writing with Loyola Press, there wouldn't be any bad language or rolling in the sheets, even in the YA novels. But I think, you know, a good comparison would be I actually have a true middle grade novel coming out in February from our Sunday Visitor called Penny and the Stolen Chalice. And that was really written for 4th through 6th graders. It's like a modern day mystery at a Catholic, school. Just a one-off. It has nothing to do with this current series. But that one truly is written for middle graders, and you can tell just, in the length and the language that I use. It's definitely, aimed at a younger audience. Unlike the Harwood Mysteries, which, if anything, is really written at a higher level, different levels so that adults can enjoy it, older kids can enjoy it, but also middle schoolers can access it. And so, that's where I would see the difference. It was really just maybe in the themes, the kinds of situations the characters find themselves in are much more dangerous, if you will, in these YA novels.
So tell us about Murder at Pinewood Manor.
So this was my, Agatha Christie homage, the murder mystery whodunit. The Harwood Mysteries, just real quick as a recap, takes place in 12th century England. It's historical fiction, published by Loyola Press. Basically every book, Zan, who's my main character, and his two friends, Lucy and Christina, are solving kind of different spooky mysteries in 12th century England. And usually they're related to or on the grounds of a monastery called Harwood Abbey, hence the Harwood Mysteries. And in each book, I try to do something a little different. Book 2 was like a ghost story. Book 3 was a jewel thief, whodunit. Book 4 was kind of a witch story. So book 5 was my murder mystery. And I, grew up reading, Agatha Christie books, and I love the cast of characters. Somebody gets killed near the beginning of the book. The main suspect in my book is a crusader recently returned from the Holy Land. This book takes place in 1187, just a few months before Jerusalem falls to the Muslims under Saladin. And so the Third Crusade is about to start off with Richard the Lionheart, the King Richard, and all that good stuff. So this is a crusader who's coming back from the Holy Land. They think he's murdered the blacksmith in town, but Zan and Lucy and Christina think he might be innocent, and so they're trying to uncover who's the real murderer.
Fascinating. How accurate in terms of history, because we talk a lot here on the podcast about how history is really an exciting topic, but it seems that in so many schools the excitement has been sucked out of it, and kids are just expected to memorize dates and facts, and there's no mystery. There's no none of that excitement that actually exists in history. How accurate would your books be in terms historically?
So my books are written through the lens of essentially a peasant boy and two, fairly lower middle class girls who are his friends in the Middle Ages. Now, most of the history that we know is the history of royals and the history of political leaders. And so none of the characters in my book are actually true historical characters. So they're fictional characters living in historical times with historical events in the background. Some of them, like book 2, is probably got the most hardcore history in it because it's the history of the city of Lincoln and Lincoln Cathedral, where book 2 is the haunted cathedral. That's the one where they think there's a ghost of a little girl in the cathedral. And Lincoln Cathedral has this amazing history, and I go into it in the book. So I'd say that, there's a lot of world building, especially in book 1. You really see how feudalism worked in the Middle Ages, monasticism, the importance and lives of the monks and the nuns at the abbey. And you kind of see that lived out around the characters as they're going about their day. Book 5 has a lot of history in it, in the sense of it's talking about what's happening in the Holy Land leading up to the Third Crusade. So there's discussion of these events, and you're seeing kind of life in a small village in feudal England. But unlike some historical, fiction books where you're actually in the shoes of the actual historical characters, because I chose, a much lower level of society to look at, we just don't have a lot recorded about those folks.
And looking at life through those lenses is probably a lot more like the lens that we would have been looking through if we had lived at that time.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I definitely am not a royal or a rich man. So if I were a rich man, but I'm not. So yes, that sort of would have been me growing up, in, middle class or lower middle class New Jersey, where I grew up. It would have been, I'd say I would have been several cuts above my main character, Zan. I would have probably been more like, Lucy or Christina.
What was it about this time in history that inspires you to write this, so many stories?
It's just a very fascinating period. What I really wanted, because we were homeschoolers when I started writing the series. I started writing the first book like 15 years plus ago. And so the more recent books, I really have just penned. In fact, book 6 I just sent to the publisher, and that's going to be the final book in the series. But when I was looking at what part of history to choose, I wanted something that would really illustrate all of the key things that we want to learn about in the Middle Ages, and that's where I was thinking about feudalism, the manor system, monasticism, the importance of the monks, and the Crusades. Were sort of 4 of the things that I really wanted to illustrate, but I didn't want to make it too early, with the First Crusade, or too late, and so this seemed like a good balance of picking just a few years before the Third Crusade, which takes place starting in 1189. The Second Crusade was in 1154, and this is also soon after the martyrdom of Thomas Becket. It's after the Saint Bernard Clairvaux, who brings out the Second Crusade. So there's a lot of discussion about those things in the book, or in the book series. And I don't know, it's just a fascinating time in history. There's still knights, there's still feudalism. King Henry II is in his final years. His sons are all rebelling against him, and so there's some of that comes out in book 4. And it seemed like a fascinating time to look at for especially English history in really the Middle Ages.
Yeah. And in your day job, you are a law professor. How does that? Is there any overlap between what you're teaching your law students and what you're writing, and vice versa?
Well, the law that we practice in the United States and that we teach in our law schools have a deep tradition back in English common law. And English common law, and things like the Magna Carta, which was 1215 under King John, one of King Henry II's sons. And King Henry II actually was the guy who really put into place for the first time a lot of the legal reforms that, really changed how England had, it just started. The jury system eventually kind of starts because of things he initiated. So he was pretty instrumental legally. And so as a lawyer and a law professor, we talk a lot about the common law. We talk a lot about English, legal tradition. And it really does sort of all originate around this time period that I'm writing. And so that's been interesting. So I've been able to sort of take some of what, we talk about in law school and apply it. And then I also like to have, in some of the books, scenes that resemble trials or investigations where there's like a hearing of some sort, especially, in book 1 and 3, there's definitely some of that going on. And I like to talk about sort of the legal way that they would process a criminal, for instance, or a dispute. And so, yeah, I get to use some of that, but not like really law school stuff.
Yeah. You've been, this is book 5. You said that when you first started writing the series, that was 15 years ago. And certainly our culture has seen a lot of changes in 15 years. Have those changes affected the way the stories have evolved?
My first draft was about 15 years ago of Shadow in the Dark, but in 2017, I rewrote the first 3 books, which I had previously had versions of out there, for Loyola Press, and I rewrote them. It's probably 60% new writing when I rewrote them. And definitely rewrote them with the help of some great editors that Loyola gave me, and very much with a modern, 21st century audience in mind. I would say one of the things that was most interesting because I'm writing about the Middle Ages, so and I'm trying to make it generally historically accurate. I update a little bit of the concepts so that a few of the characters might be more accessible to our, teens. But, I'm trying to illustrate what life was like. But what was interesting to me is when I was writing book 6, especially, Zan and Christina and Lucy are going to wind up leaving England and heading into Moorish Portugal right before the Third Crusade. And so they're surrounded by Muslims at this point. And that was kind of interesting to say, okay, well, how do I try to present, on the one hand, how a medieval person from England might view the Muslims, the Moors, who they were about to go to war against again, and yet at the same time pay attention to our modern sensitivities and sensibilities about world religions and ecumenism and things like that. And so that was a delicate dance to try to, not vilify a religious group. Whereas if I wrote the book in the Middle Ages, I'm sure I probably would have made the Muslims all horrible people. And, obviously I didn't want to do that and wouldn't do that here. And so that was probably where I had the most, having to kind of be most careful considering our modern audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting how our perspectives change, and how important do you think it is, or how effective do you think it could be for a family to use a series like the Harwood Mysteries to kind of read together and to help kids see others, people from other religions, other cultures, as part of our beautiful human family? Because after all, Loyola Press is a Catholic press. You're part of our fun Catholic teen authors group that we're so friendly with and that have contributed so much to the podcast. And that is one of the most important teachings of Jesus, is that we are all one beautiful human family and that we belong to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably two answers to your question here. One is Loyola also has released some incredible audiobooks for each of these with the same narrator, this English guy named Rafe Beckley, who just does an amazing job with all the, audiobooks. So that's one way to read it with your family, especially if you have younger kids, or you just, especially with a reluctant reader or something like that. But the other thing is I really wrote the books to be educational in a sense, although they're, kind of spooky Harry Potter vibe to them. At the end of the day, they're also historical fiction, and they cover, universal themes, religious and, universal values of, like you talk about, one human family and those kinds of things. And so I wrote them to be consumed by, kids either in schools or homeschooling groups. And that's actually been one of the most exciting developments for me, is I've been giving a lot of talks at middle schools especially, and teachers are ordering, especially book 1, and then using them in their classrooms with the kids as supplemental reading for, like, church history or religion or social studies. And that has been exciting because that's really what I wanted to accomplish with the series. So yeah, good for schools, good for homeschool groups, and good for families, especially families that are, very hands-on involved with educating their kids.
Yeah. You mentioned that your family were homeschoolers, and that this is very popular with the homeschooling group. Even, we've talked to a lot of school authors or authors who are homeschoolers here on the podcast. But I think it still remains a mystery to a lot of families, this idea of schooling your kids at home and being, even though most families became their kids' teachers during the pandemic, I don't think they see themselves as being able to do that. Can you take a minute or two just to talk about your family's experience in the homeschool realm? Absolutely.
And I actually still write a legal column for Practical Homeschooling magazine. So I'm still kind of, even though my youngest is now, 22 and just graduated college, so we're not homeschooling ourselves anymore, but I'm still sort of have one foot into the homeschool communities. And I would say there's so much. I mean, okay, homeschooling is not for every family, mm-hmm. right? Not every family situation is going to permit it. Not every parent might have the disposition or desire to be with their kids. But there have been so many advances in how we do homeschooling nowadays. There's a lot more community involvement than maybe back in the 80s or 70s when homeschooling was more still in its infancy, if you will. Homeschool groups, co-ops, there's virtual schools. I mean, there's a lot of things where you can mix what might be more considered a traditional way of schooling with homeschooling. And there's a lot of support. There are so many homeschoolers out there now, and it's even grown more since the pandemic. And you can find a homeschool group in pretty much every neighborhood, of this country. It's totally legal. There's a lot of support. There's curricula that are specifically geared towards it, and a lot of support for parents. And so really anybody who wants to do it can do it. A lot of the myths we hear about homeschooling, like, oh, my kid won't be socialized properly, they're really myths. If you're doing homeschooling the way it should be done, your kid's going to be better socialized than, sending a kid to a public school. So, there's, I would just offer encouragement and just, Google a little bit of homeschool groups in your area, and you'll find a plethora of material and support, for doing that. And the kinds of books that you mentioned, like CatholicTeenBooks.com, there's like 16 of us authors writing for kids. Some of them, those other authors are also homeschool moms, usually. I might be the only guy actually in CatholicTeenBooks.com. And a lot of them were homeschoolers or are homeschoolers, and they're able to do it and write books. So, definitely check into it if you even have an inkling of wanting to do that for your family.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that there's a plethora of support and materials. I can attest to that. We weren't homeschool family, but we certainly looked at it, and I've participated in a couple of homeschool conventions, and the one I attended in Orlando, Florida, not too far from where you are, man, there were like 20,000 people there, all, homeschool kids and their parents, and talk about materials and support, curricula for those families. I mean, it was overwhelming. So, yeah,
families of every kind too.
Mm-hmm.
There's some big, Christian homeschool conventions. There's also some big Catholic homeschool conventions, and there's some big secular homeschool conventions. So it's not just for religious families either. I think the secular part has probably grown more than people realize. It's not always about, just wanting to raise your kids in your faith.
Yeah. And, the reality is, I think a lot of people sit down and go, but that's the homeschooling. It's just so different, and it's not the way kids have been educated forever. And, well, the reality is, sitting kids in a row in a classroom with other 10-year-olds or whatever, that's a fairly new phenomenon.
Yes, it totally is a new phenomenon, in the last 200 years. And in fact, if you go back to my Harwood Mysteries, Zan gets educated by the monks in 1184 when the books start. And you can see, in the Middle Ages, most people weren't educated at all, mm-hmm. unless they were like a monk or a royal. But for the way the monks would educate, their novices, it wouldn't have been the way we would educate now either. And yeah, I mean, until, the mid 1800s, really, we don't see sort of this modern phenomenon that we're used to. And most of our founders were homeschooled. And they seem to have done all right for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, educate us as to where we can go to find out more about you and find out more about Murder at Pinewood Manor, Book 5, and the Harwood Mysteries.
Yes, so you can get the whole series, currently 5 books. Of course, you can get them on Amazon. Loyola Press, I think this is going to air before Christmas. Loyola Press has been running an incredible, 50% off, kind of Black Friday kind of a thing, that might still be going on. So go to the Loyola Press website. You'll never find a better discount anywhere on the internet than that. But I also say if you have the time, go to your local independent or Catholic, Christian bookstore and, ask them if they have it or if they can stock it. Cause I always feel like we want to support our mom and pop stores whenever we can in our communities.
Absolutely.
And find out more about me. on my website, antonykolenc.com. There's no H in that.
And even though this is, kind of a faith-based story, we can still go to our public libraries and ask them if they'd add it to their collection.
Absolutely. It's in a lot of public libraries. And even though it's faith-based in one sense, because it takes place in medieval times in a sort of monastery setting, or at least that's the initial premise, it really can be mainstreamed because it's not a truly religious book. It's just a book that takes place in a setting where there happen to be religious people. And in fact, some of the editors I worked with were agnostics or atheists, and when I asked them about the religious content, they were not offended at all by it. They say, well, it's totally organic and natural to what was happening. So it's definitely not just for Christians.
Yeah. We've had a great time speaking to our friend Antony Kolenc about his brand new book, Murder at Pinewood Manor. It's book number 5 in the Harwood Mysteries series. Hey, Anthony, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you, Jed, and you and your family have a very blessed and happy Advent and Christmas.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. We are so grateful that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. We'd love for you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. If you are on LinkedIn, please connect with Jed Doherty. We also have a Reading with Your Kids page on LinkedIn. We would love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button to find out how you can be a guest here in the show, and find out how we can help you celebrate your book with the world. And also, parents, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com to download our free online magazine. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our amazing guest. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
What?